Everyone, and welcome back to another kind of Explorer's Guide to Ravion video about the various kind of actual world, as opposed to what we've been talking about so far, which has been the deities. We'll continue kind of doing the deities and the different aspects of the pantheon, but for now, we're going to start into every other kind of weekend. We'll jump into a little bit more details about the actual political landscape in the world as it is. Uh, Along those lines, this time we're actually going to start with the Remont Empire, and we're going to do a rough overview for this one and then jump into the various individual regions for future videos. But with the Remont Empire, it is an empire to the west of the world, as it's most commonly depicted on the map. It's often called the nation of many shapes, with a great many peoples and races, calling its various territories home. It has a wide variety of landscapes to it, which is kind of the beneficial aspect, is you can become kind of a melting pot where people from different parts of the world with different ecosystems find their own place that reminds them of home, which has made this, Remont Empire kind of a more inclusive nation in terms of landscape and immigration, stuff like that. But then also the fact that it tends to celebrate its own way of life and the development of that way of life, to be able to preserve itself, and understanding that sometimes culture is one of the most important things someone can have. It's a little bit more supportive when it comes to struggles. So when you have different cultural groups or anything like that, a lot of these different regions within the Remont Empire understand and appreciate different cultures and do not take kindly to the erasure of such cultures, just a respect of each in its own right. That's kind of how the Remont Empire works. So we'll go through kind of the government structure in this video, the history of the Remont Empire in total, and then some notable holiday events and what these international relationships look like. The government structure, as it's been put into place, is a little bit more of a republic, with elected officials chosen to represent the people of various towns. The Remont Empire being a conglomerate of 5 different regions within means that it needs some representation for the individual average person. So if I zoom in on my kind of diagram here, scoot on over to it, we're going to start from the bottom up to build it. Established city voters are the people that start the chain of the process within each of the 5 regions, as you can see, the 5 different regions. Each region has a number of cities or city-states or whatever groups that are present there. There is also a wide variety of people that don't live within an established city, and so that city has bounds that aren't just the city walls. It's their territory of people that live there that register as a citizen of that city that can then, vote for representation of that city itself. These are people that fall within a certain agreed boundary within the various regions' kind of city governments. These people can register within each city to be influenced by the city's laws, for city lawmaster and guardsmaster and regulatory efforts. They have taxes that they pay as an established citizen of that region. And then on top of that, they get to vote for both the city lawmaster and the city guardsmaster. And that's, they say city, but it's more of this small, city bounds around the actual city itself. So city lawmasters and city guardsmasters are the people that are one of the higher officials that you'll see within each city region. And they make up the majority of this government structure on the average basis. City lawmasters end up determining and being the judge. They implement and oversee the use and enforcement of laws with the guardsmaster. They determine whether or not someone broke the law, hear appeals, deal with everything kind of around the more cerebral side of law enforcement and management, while at the same time enacting various proclamations and other things that might come down from the more higher regional leaders or other things. They also oversee with the guardsmaster some details with taxes. At the same time, city guardsmasters are more of the, we need to protect the region and its people. And so they serve as both the city's town guard and various military efforts. They oversee some general military appropriation and collection when it comes to when it's needed. It's not quite a draft, but they oversee the recruitment and minor training, should it be necessary, of some basic fighting force. They also kind of run these guards and train and deal with militias as necessary for individual city regions if there's a localized threat. From there, city lawmasters and guardsmasters that represent the established city voters, those average Joes, vote for a council person. In all of the cities, lawmasters and guardsmasters get together to vote on a council person that then in turn represents the entirety of the region on the national scale. The council people basically they're the go-between between the regions and the national scale for the emperor or empress. They serve as advisors and experts on their home region's kind of needs and wants and development, as well as dealing with any issues by working with the lawmasters and guardsmasters of each established city. They deal with anything that might come up that's unforeseen. From there, they go and have a temporary residence within their region and another temporary residence within the capital city of Pinehall, where they spend much of their time as a working office and then go back and forth between each residence to be able to understand exactly what you're looking at for a regional need, and understand exactly what you're looking at from a national perspective, and bringing all of your regional needs on the national scale as a representative of your region or your subsect of the Remont Empire, so that it can not be lost in the shuffle of international politics. They're able to work with then the emperor or empress at the time, or regent should it be necessary, to rule the nation's internal affairs. They get the brunt of the work for, hey, we need a proclamation, we need some sort of an incentive or something to happen with your region or all of the regions. These council people then work with city guards masters and lawmasters to end up dealing with anything that might come up as an issue and put things into place for different laws or regulatory efforts. With the development of technology and magic happening on a fairly rapid pace within the world, things are going to come up. There's going to be somebody that does something crazy, and they have to figure out how to be okay with that. So they're going to end up dealing with a lot of these internal affairs, and then dealing with whatever else might come from their specific regions, and work with the emperor or empress. Finally, the emperor or empress, at this point it's Samson Remont, is responsible for kind of working with this council of these council people, and being almost like a mediator for this political discourse. They serve as advisors, and he has the final say. However, he is at this point in their first emperor for the Remont Empire. And the general trend is that he tends to be a more measured and level-headed person. And so up until now, the Remont Empire has had a very wise leader that relies on the advisement of experts rather than his own personal feelings. That may or may not be true for the next or the one after that or into the future. It is a faulty system, but at the same time, with all of these council people, these are wise advisors on internal affairs for each region, and he needs to understand each kind of aspect of their expertise. At the biggest other part of this, this council also handles international relationships. And so recently within the world history, the Serac Waste has had a turnover of government control. The old sultan has disappeared, and the new sultan has risen, the new sultan Hadid Sandblaze. And the previously tenuous relationship between the Serac Waste is starting to improve. It was relatively neutral, and now it's more fair and positive. So a lot of the Remont Empire's council and the emperor is working with the sultan to improve this relationship further and deal with all of the internal needs and external needs that a government like this would require. The emperor does also have some, and I don't include them on this chart, appointed experts that they just also pull into the council as experts of various military efforts, and magical efforts and other things like that. There are people that aren't necessarily elected, but that the emperor appoints or dismisses at their pleasure, along with the rest of this council. Should the council vote, they can remove someone from the council chambers, or from allowance into the council chambers, to be able to maintain their own independence and their own strength. Should there be some sort of a magical savant, or someone that they need to be an expert for divination, they need somebody with this magical expertise on hand, and the emperor might appoint them. But should they prove themselves to be a danger, the emperor can dismiss them, or the council can work with the emperor to dismiss them. Up until now, there hasn't been too many big shakeups because the emperor, being a wise man, works with his council to do these things. So the emperor doesn't really get shown up at this point. He works with his people to determine what's the best plan of action. That is the strength that he has, is he is a strong and level-headed person. But those people I don't have included on that chart. So if we continue on here, the council is made up of all these elected leaders, but it's kind of an interesting kind of point is, as we go through the history, you'll kind of get a sense of where Samson Remont, the current emperor, started. The Remont Empire used to be this loose association of territories operating independently of one another, and it was kind of this international trade and commerce focused interaction between all of these five nations. They all lived on the Horsehead Peninsula. They lived in close conjunction to each other, so you kind of get to know each other and have some basic understanding of how all of each other works. And you want to be on the same page, so to speak, but you don't have to be the same country. So right now, at this point in the world, it is 2995 PD, I believe. The Remont Empire kind of gets its start in the year 2890 PD. The Lebet Empire had become a prominent military force on the world stage, and at this point, it began to expand and hope to try to expand across the ocean into the Horsehead Peninsula, where all of these territories existed. Under threat of attack from this relatively new Lebet Empire, and as these Lebet Empire forces were coming into the Remont Empire primarily through the Mistkeep if they really had to, but most primarily through the Delta region, uh, they started to clear out entire cities and settlements of their initial base culture or determination, and impose Lebet Empire ideals and rule on these different cities. There are monuments and ruins at this point within the world that is an entire burnt library of knowledge, or a monastery of knowledge, of collected knowledge, that was destroyed to impart Lebet Empire ideals in their place. So, seeing that their way of life was being lost, the Remont Empire at this point didn't exist, but started to begin to form, I guess is the best way to put it, with the Snowwatch region and the Delta region starting to try to resist this Lebet force. After losing battles in the Snowwatch and Delta regions, the regions as a whole saw their way of life being overwritten with each life lost in these battles. And as the people struggled to preserve themselves from the Lebet forces, there rose one man from the Delta region who stood up to these superior forces by inspiring his much smaller fighting force that he had developed to fight smarter by using the landscape to their advantage, making the frozen mountains of the Snowwatch region a stronghold, and the various rivers that intertwine through the Delta region both avenues of transport for resources and military, forces for personnel, but then also a means of hideouts and strongholds in different pockets. The Lebet Empire at this point is fighting on unfamiliar ground. They do not know much of the internal region of the Horsehead Peninsula. They were starting to get a foothold, and it was going to be an easy time because there wasn't any big military force. There was just loose association of cooperative regions. So they thought that they could just steamroll straight through. Didn't really end up working. So this man, as you could probably guess, Samson Remont, had this small team of people that he used as his individual fighting force that led this larger resistance against the Lebet Empire. And utilizing these techniques for sneak attacks and ambushes and everything kind of along those lines, kind of a guerrilla warfare style fighting tactic, the man and his team were able to kind of slowly secure parts of their region and destroy ports of entry for the Lebet Empire along the Delta region and the Snowwatch region's coastline. Now, the Lebet Empire at this point was starting to send a tidal wave of forces to overwhelm the much smaller militia, but having these ports of entry under the control of these rebels, or at this point destroyed, kind of narrowed down and filtered down that tidal wave of forces to a slow trickle, which made it a lot easier for this kind of resistance to maintain their battle strategy and actually make a difference. Uh, but in time, the Lebet Empire, being not complete idiots, ended up taking some time to learn for the people that were there. You know, emissaries would come and they would work with loyalists from within the Delta region that had changed their allegiances to be guides for the Lebet Empire, or different scouts or rangers, or give them some sort of a map for military strategy and practice so that they actually stood a chance at this point. Uh, from there, the Lebet Empire started to actually gain some more footing, and the tide turned back against the resistance. That's when they knew that they couldn't really be on their own. This much smaller resistance could not stay within just the Delta and Snowwatch regions. But Samson Ramont's team had people from all over. So they decided to travel the rest of these regions and try to recruit these regions' alliance to fight the much larger Lebet forces. Now, being further inland and away from the coastline where the Lebet Empire was mounting their attacks, these other regions were in danger in the future, but not right now. So they took some time and were working to convince them, uh, and ended up kind of uniting these territories. Samson Remont and his team ended up uniting these territories to fight this battle against the Lebet Empire. So at this point, the regions had agreed, gaining this respect for Samson and his wisdom and his team. Eventually, it got to the point where in the year 2898 PD, the Lebet forces were driven back from all of their other places to one stronghold in the Snowwatch region's mountains, specifically the Chillblood Mount. At this point, they was the one last bastion where the Lebet forces were slowly starting to dwindle and mounting attacks from this Chillblood Mount against the Snowwatch region and the Grassbend and the Delta region. They were lashing out in an attempt to try to make their way back to the coastline and escape, if not take out as many people as possible to secure a port so that they could eventually uh, deal with everything for getting like new soldiers back in, reestablish this port of entry. Now, in this 2898, all of these regions had sent their various militias and fighting forces, along with Samson Vermont and his team, who led the charge for a battle that would end this war, called the Battle of Chillblood Mount. The people drove the last remaining vestiges of the Lebet forces out, killing them or sending them fleeing, and with no will to continue to fight before returning victorious. But much of the team for Samson Vermont and a lot of the different people within these various militias ended up either dying or becoming wounded in this battle. It was an uphill battle against a mountain fortress in the middle of winter. It was a horrible landscape to be fighting in, but they didn't have a choice because once the sea ice came up from the ice cut sea in the spring, the Lebet forces would be coming. So they had to hurry through this winter battle up a rough, rugged mountain landscape where they lost so many people, but they ultimately won. Now, after this, they knew that there were other nations that would eventually try, potentially, to expand into the Horsehead Peninsula, if not the Lebet Empire in the future. So Samson Remont continued with the rest of his remaining team to work to establish the nation's structure as this unified nation against all other outside forces. And by the year 2900 PD, the Remont Empire was finally born. It was named for the first emperor and champion for the Lebet Repulsion, Samson Remont. Samson and his team of heroes have been immortalized throughout the history of this empire, and without the new governmental system being led by this poet king himself. Various representatives were chosen from each of the regions that made up the Remont Empire as it is today, but one of the most important things to keep in mind is that one of their greatest focuses was to preserve their way of life. So keeping track of each individual region's perspectives and traditions was an important thing for them to recognize. They didn't want any erasure to happen of different cultural viewpoints, but they also wanted to make sure that people were able to survive and be unified. So there ended up being a sort of compromise for representation. But it's years from there now, and the Remont Empire is a strong and unified nation with highly cooperative territories that each with their own respective champion and kind of traditions work together and remember all of the sacrifices that their individual members made to repel this Lebet Empire's kind of warring force, this army. Right now it is 2995 PD, and the Remont Empire is still flourishing under this relative peace under Samson Remont, though he's getting older in age. They've become allies to the Mesquite Mining Guild and trade partners to the Serac Wastes, but they've never really forgiven the Lebet Empire for its attempt at expansion, and the Dokig Kingdom is the other nation on the world stage that's just too new to even get a feel on. So if we jump in from the history into these international relationships, we'll come back to the holidays in a moment. The Mesquite Mining Guild is a partner, for a trade partner, but also unified by their both kind of loathing perspective against the Lebet Empire. The Remont Empire and the Mesquite tend to work together from a trade perspective, but also have a military alliance just in case the Lebet Empire, which borders up against the Mesquite, were to try to expand into the Mesquite again, or into the Remont Empire again, because they tried both nations once. Both of them have agreed to support each other with military aid to repel these forces should it be needed. It's kind of a good interpersonal relationship that these two nations have. The Lebet Empire, on the other hand, their relationship with the Lebet Empire and the Remont Empire is really negative. They do not approve of the Lebet Empire's various current tactics, namely being the meddling of different nations' international kind of internal national affairs. The Lebet Empire is very big on espionage and deceit. They make usual practice of meddling in other countries' affairs, and they take as much as they can from other nations, using raiding parties and other things like that along the coastline, citing that their nation is being better and stronger, and they inherently deserve everything that they have, and that everything all the other nations have. Kind of a manifest destiny, kind of a perspective. At the same time, the Lebet Empire is a very religiously based nation, and this highly focused religious perspective has led to a little bit more of a crusade that is, we are the masters of the world, so we need to take back our places. You know, that kind of a perspective. So the Lebet Empire is a little bit on the bad side in terms from the perspective of the Remont Empire. They're not to be trusted. There is a tense peace, but with no really overt ambitions at conquest. But they don't trust each other. They don't like each other, and that isn't likely to change anytime soon. The Serac Wastes is a little bit different. There used to be a more neutral relationship, but now with the turnover of the new Sultan, there has been a little bit more positive relationship. The Sultan Hadid Sandblaze is now new to power, and has proven himself to be a wise and level-headed ruler. And so the Serac Wastes are a little bit more supported by the Remont Empire for trade and research purposes. The Serac Wastes are covered in, at least for the Serac Desert, are absolutely covered in various like ruins and structures, some that go all the way down to the Underdark with labyrinths and trap rooms and mysterious artifacts and all sorts of intriguing things that pretty much everyone on the world stage wants to explore. But the Remont Empire has been sponsoring and paying for and even sending people with Serac Waste officials and tribe officials and everything like that to explore these various ruins, to try to get a little bit more information. And that, up until now, has been the only relationship with the Serac Wastes until Hadid Sandblaze stepped into power. Now, with him in power, they've begun to have a little bit more of a trade and cooperative relationship, starting to eke towards the same kind of relationship they have with the Mistkeep, especially because the Serac Waste lies to the south of the Labatt Empire. That leaves the Serac Waste and the Mistkeep as kind of bookends to the Labatt Empire. If the Remont Empire can be allies with both of those, then they have additional sets of eyes against the Labatt Empire in the future. As I said, otherwise, the Doke Kingdom is too new to really get the feeling on. They're hesitantly watching and waiting to see what this fledgling nation will really do. One of the things that they do know and do not like is that they had a lot of refugees that came from the Doke territory shortly after the nation established itself. And the new young queen, Queen Melistre, came into power. She ended up being kind of this sign, and all of these people left the Doke Kingdom for some reason, working with these different refugees that fled to either the Serac Wastes or to the Remont Empire. It seems as though there's been some sort of an inquisition where various people were either forced to flee for their lives or killed as some sort of an erasure of cultures or erasure of various groups within the Doke Kingdom's territory, which is something that the Remont Empire has historically hated. So the Remont Empire doesn't really trust the Doke Kingdom, but they aren't outright enemies with them. The world as it is relatively at peace. But given all of these refugees, and at the same time the fact that the Doke Kingdom is slowly kind of cozying up to the Labatt Empire, the Remont Empire is a little bit less willing to work with them and being really, really wary about relationships with them. Now, the last kind of fun things for the Remont Empire, before we get into the next videos and go through the Grassbend and the other regions, are some of the holidays. One of the holidays that we saw within our campaign, it was the start of the campaign, is the 10th day of Thymerus, also known as Empire Day. This holiday is commonly referred to as Empire Day, and it recognizes the day that the Remont Empire was finally officially formed with a ruling council and established relationships across all of the various territories. It's a holiday most often celebrated across the entirety of the empire as a day of celebration that ends a week-long celebration or carnival called the Empire Day Festival. This festival takes place across the empire as a whole, with the people of these various regions vying to be the host of the royal close, a ceremony that the royal family performs to close out the festival and strengthen the bond between the nations, or regions. Basically, what this royal close is it's kind of like the Super Bowl. One state or one region is chosen to host this royal close, and the ones selected, one of the cities within that region, that usually they'll end up determining, the council person will determine. The city within this region will then host a member of the royal family, either Samson or, at this point for our campaign, Amelia, his daughter, as they both celebrate with the townspeople and with everyone for the week of the Empire Day Festival, and then finally close it out with a speech and everything along the lines to strengthen these kind of regional relationships. That is one of the festivals that we see within the campaign. It's the first video that we ever do, the first episode that we've ever done. But at this point, we don't have very many that are full videos. So there's a lot of games, carnival games, celebrations, a fight at the very end, and then a royal close. Now, some of the other ones are pretty simple. They're historical holidays. The 7th of Sunis is a harvest close, but not everyone celebrates it. Some of the regions that don't have a very clear defined growing season for spring, winter, summer, fall don't really have a harvest close. Some of the ones that are in the deepest and warmest parts of the grassland region kind of have a rough growing season throughout the entire year. So they don't have any reason to celebrate harvest close so much as someone potentially just in the Snow Watch. The Snow Watch has a very clear winter to summer to fall. Same with the Lachlan Majocracy in the Delta region. So a lot of these regions will celebrate this harvest close as the coming of winter and to raise spirits. The 21st of Malus is referred to as Ice Crest, and the 21st of Amontis is known as Conflagus. Each, respectively, the Ice Crest is the day when the planes thin just a little bit between the combined elemental plane of ice, making the entirety of the Remont Empire just a little bit cooler. And then the Conflagus is where it borders on the edge of the plane of fire and kind of heats everything up. It's kind of the coldest, and the warmest day of the year. The 21st of Amontis is most commonly, sorry, that I did that one. The 3rd day of Talus, this is a holiday called the Chillblood Memorial. It's a day when the regions of the Empire celebrate the sacrifice that all of their various forces made to repel the Lilbet Empire at the Battle of Chillblood Mountain. They celebrate all of these heroes this day. It's kind of like a Memorial Day. The 15th of Ogmanus is a holiday referred to as the Festival of Lights. It's a relatively niche celebration, but it, for the most part, has been adopted across the rest of the Delta region and the rest of the Empire as a whole, where people make paper lanterns with the person's hopes and dreams within it, kind of a wish, and they release these lanterns into the night sky in the hopes that this act will grant them one of the favor of one of the gods. Should one of them find one of these lanterns, it's kind of a I'm going to tell them in a quiet prayer within this lantern what I would like, what I need. And so some will wish for peace, some will wish for family, some will make this wish and let the lantern go so that eventually their prayer can reach the heavens and hopefully bridge the divine gap that has been put in place between the inner and outer planes. It's kind of a symbolic gesture, but at the same time, it's a very pretty experience with many paper lanterns filling the night sky. On the 26th of Shantis, this holiday is referred to as Pyre Day. It's more celebrated within the tribes than the civilized kind of cities, but they honor their dead with a massive communal funeral pyre. They don't necessarily have all of these bodies as a funeral pyre, but they take whole log timbers and carve their loved ones' names into them, and then build them up into this one large pyre to celebrate everyone that they have lost in the last year, and light it at the stroke of midnight to try to let it burn as long as possible. Keep it burning and stoke the flames and let these souls kind of find rest and let it be a beacon so that these people that have potentially just been dead for months now can see it from wherever they are in the embrace of whatever god they're within, and recognize that they are not forgotten. It's kind of a slow beacon on the landscape. So that is it for everything for this Remont Empire overview. In the next few videos, we'll cover the different individual regions of the Remont Empire, and it'll be pretty quick per video. It'll be stuff like the Grassland region with the general geology, ecology, and then some significant cultures within. But we'll kind of touch on some of the individual kind of parts of things as we go as well. So otherwise, thank you very much for watching the video this far. It's kind of a bigger, drier video, given, history class and government and politics. But I appreciate you all sticking through to this point. So thank you all. And once again, remember, it doesn't take much to make a difference out in the world. So be the difference that you want to see out there. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye.